Hey guys, Jane here, and I'm doing a review on Margaret Atwood's The Testaments. And this is I wouldn't call it a sequel to The Handmaid's Tale. If you're looking for a sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, I'm not sure that you'll be happy with this. This is another book set in the world of The Handmaid's Tale. This book follows the first-person accounts of three different characters. It follows Aunt Lydia, who was from the first book. She is one of the aunts who is in charge of putting the handmaids in their place. There is Agnes, who has, as far back as she can remember, lived in Gilead. She's been raised there. And then there is, I think her name is Daisy, and she was raised in Canada. All of these are told in first-person accounts, so it can get confusing who is who because the chapter headings don't head with who the character is. It just tells you where they are in the case of Aunt Lydia's. Or, like, it says transcript of witness testimony 369A, and that is Agnes, which is the girl from Gilead, and 369B is Daisy, the girl from Canada. But throughout the book, Daisy actually goes by multiple names, and actually so do all the characters. I think each character in here has at least 2 names, so figuring out who was who, especially when they're told in first-person accounts and you're not continuously being told their names, can be confusing. This was especially important because I wasn't intentionally doing a buddy read with my friend, but my friend Christina was reading this at the same time, and so we were messaging back about the characters, and sometimes it would be confusing, like, without context, if you just gave me a character name, it took me a minute to figure out, like, which one is that. So I will say that is a little bit confusing. However, this is an excellent book as far as getting you more of a feel for the areas of Gilead that you don't necessarily get to see fully in The Handmaid's Tale. So I gave this a 4.5 out of 5. I really, really enjoyed it. I didn't quite love it to the level of The Handmaid's Tale, but it was still really, really good. The tie-ins to The Handmaid's Tale are maybe a little more limited, I think, than other people would have hoped for. Without giving too much away, there is Offred, who we meet in The Handmaid's Tale, does not appear in this book, although she is kind of, sort of mentioned, and there's kind of, sort of a comment like, hey, maybe this person that we're talking about, especially when you are doing the transcripts part, was Offred. At the very back of this book, just like in the back of the Handmaid's Tale, you have the symposium where all the scholars of, the Gilead times are getting together and talking. And that is when they're like, oh, we wonder if this person from the book might have been the person whose information we found previously. We don't know, we can't prove it, but maybe. But Offred is not actually in this book, and for the most part, none of the characters except for Aunt Lydia, who were in the last book, play an important role that we know of. None of them are mentioned by name. So if you were wanting something that was very much like Offred's continued story, what happened with her, what happened with Nick, did they escape, this is not that. And I think that is maybe what people's who are really disappointed in this book are finding, is that they wanted something that it's not. This is a different look at Gilead. With Aunt Lydia, you're looking at kind of how the women's power structure worked. And I don't remember if it was written in here or if it was an interview I watched, but basically, anytime you have an overthrow of this kind of nature and a suppression, there has to be a way to control the women. And women have to be controlled by women. And the ants are kind of that control force for controlling the women. So we see how Aunt Lydia became an ant and who she really is in the regime, and whether she's a true believer or a person stuck in circumstances or a little bit of both. So we have Aunt Lydia's character, and we really get a feel for more about how Gilead, the power structure, particularly the ants, how they were brought in, how they were put in positions of power to train the handmaidens such as Offred later, and how they were kind of indoctrinated, and how the ants live. We also, like I said, have Agnes, who was raised in Gilead. And one thing that is interesting about her is that she's very happy with most of Gilead. She makes some comment about, Gilead has problems, but she's very indoctrinated in the way her world works, and she doesn't think of Gilead as a suppression. It's not like Offred, who was coming from a very free world into Gilead, and suddenly she has no rights. Agnes has grown up this way, and there are things that she's been taught that she finds very true. For instance, their women are much more protected. There were more protections available to women in Gilead, for instance, than in the mainstream world. And they're being told not to incite lust. Now, that doesn't mean there is no predators in Gilead, because there's predators everywhere. And so we do see kind of a dark side of Gilead, both through Aunt Lydia and some of the things Agnes encounters. But Agnes sees some of the beauty of the way Gilead works and why people are drawn to it. And I think people who have grown up in very conservative religions can really relate to this of, there might be some bad things and some things that you don't like about the religion or you're not comfortable with, but there's so many good things too. And if you could just weed out the really bad stuff, maybe you could have something wonderful and sustainable. Agnes really, I think, is in a way the voice of Gilead, the pro-Gilead. She sees its flaws, but that's her world, and that's how she was raised. And I will say that I see this a lot in our view of the Western world, of how other cultures should live and should do things. I think I mentioned before, I have a friend who lives in Pakistan, and she is very proud of the way her society works. The separation of males and females. She does go to a public school, but she's schooled with other females. She's not allowed to be around men who are not family members. She will ultimately probably enter into an arranged marriage with a cousin, because that's just what they do. She has a lot of things that she's not allowed to do, and I talk to her and I'm like, really? That sounds awful. I like my freedoms. But at the same time, they have very close family connections. She absolutely loves her religion. She feels very connected to her town and herself and her identity as a Muslim woman. And mind you, she's younger, but she reminded me a lot of Agnes, actually. And I think we are supposed to think Agnes is naive and want her to be something a little different, maybe, because again, as people here, we are very much like, we have a lot of freedom. We think people should be able to make their own choices. We have different relationships between the sexes than they do in Gilead and in other conservative cultures. But Agnes really loves her world. And even though we see the negatives of it, we also can see a lot more of the positives through Agnes' eyes. Then you have Daisy. And Daisy, I don't want to give too much away with this, but what I will say is that Daisy is somebody who starts as an outsider looking into Gilead and then comes into Gilead. And Daisy is very much our voice in the story, if you will. She is a person who is looking at Gilead from the outside going, you people are crazy. You people are crazy. What you're doing is crazy. This is nuts. And how we often see very conservative places, and for lack of a better word, cults or other groups of people that we don't agree with their lifestyle. And again, I'm not saying that their lifestyle is a good or positive thing. Obviously, Gilead is not somewhere I want to live. It's a dystopian. But by getting all those viewpoints, you can really see a much broader picture of Gilead than Offred. And it's all, one thing I loved is it's very different from Offred's perspective. Offred is kind of, I was one thing, I'm another thing, and I'm that thing within the new order of Gilead. Whereas Agnes has been raised in Gilead. This is her norm. And Gilead's also had time to be established. So Aunt Lydia is a fairly older woman, and she's been in Gilead for a long time. And we see kind of how she got there, who she was before Gilead, and then we also see more of who she's become because of Gilead. So this book, I think, gives us a really well-rounded view of the world. But again, I think a lot of people maybe didn't enjoy it because it is not The Handmaid's Tale. It is more like we're hanging out with some people who live in this world who want to show us different perspectives. The outsider's perspective coming in, the insider's perspective, Aunt Lydia's perspective, who's kind of been on both sides of things. And also she's somebody in power. She is as powerful of a female as you can get in the Gilead power structure. And in a lot of cultures, there is some kind of hierarchy and power structure for women, but those voices are often not heard and are often lost, I think, in the history, because women didn't tend to record it. A lot of them were not able to record it like men could. So you do have Aunt Lydia being the voice for the people in power, and she gives more of a look at the upper echelons of the leaders in Gilead, and definitely a little bit of their dirty laundry. So I really enjoyed this book. I really don't have anything negative to say about it. It was not quite The Handmaid's Tale. It didn't hit me in the heart the way that Handmaid's Tale did, which is why I really couldn't give it a full 5 out of 5. I read it. It was absolutely worth reading. I don't know that I will read it again. I was satisfied. I was happy with it. It was great. But it's not something that touched me in a way that I want to revisit it necessarily. That may change, but I feel like this was a one-time thing. Like, I read it. It was good. It was a good experience. I fully enjoyed it. I enjoyed this look in the world. But I'm okay laying it to rest. I'm okay if this is my only read-through of this book. I'm okay sending it back to the library, letting somebody else read it, talking about it to people in the future, but not necessarily revisiting this aspect of the world or the people, because I really connected to Offred because we had a whole book with her and her struggles, and she was the most like myself person. Whereas these three characters, while I found them interesting, I didn't necessarily relate to them on that person is like me. and I really had trouble putting myself in their shoes. And part of the problem, of course, is that both Agnes and Daisy are young. And I know a couple of people had said Daisy was kind of annoying. She is very much the typical teen. She is very much a teenager, and her voice is very much that of a teenager. So she's a little bit annoying, but she's meant to be, I think, because she is a teenager. And Agnes is very young as well. So I think the age of them made it hard for me to connect to them. I feel like this is a book that younger readers, like people in their late teens, early 20s, on a character level might connect better to, Daisy and Agnes. And then Aunt Lydia is just not a very likable character, so it's very hard to connect to her. I understood where she was coming from. I hope that I would make different choices in her situation, but I totally understood why she did the things she did. And it was nice to get that view on her. I am also interested, I've only watched a couple of episodes of The Handmaid's Tale, the TV series, the Hulu series, and I want to see more of it and see what happens as time goes on in the series, because I'm wondering how much of these events kind of bleed into the television series. I know some of them probably do. Pretty sure quite a few of them do. But yeah, this was a good, solid read. If you are interested in learning more about Gilead, it was good. Like I said, I just didn't necessarily love the characters and connect to them on the personal level I did Offred. This was something that I felt more distance to. It felt like more of a study in Gilead, as opposed to the story of one person facing terrible oppression. So it is very similar in some ways to The Handmaid's Tale, but there are differences. I did enjoy it. I did think it was good. I think if you can go into it knowing this is not a continuation of Offred and Nick, this is a study into some different perspectives on Gilead, you could really appreciate it. This is like a scholarly, in a way, look at different people in Gilead. It is not The Handmaid's Tale. And if you're looking for it to be The Handmaid's Tale, I think you'll be really disappointed. But if you going in are aware that it is not meant to be The Handmaid's Tale, but meant to be kind of a study in Gilead. And also to find out a little more about what happened after Offred left. Because this takes place, I want to say, quite a bit after Offred had left. Like 15 years, maybe? Somewhere in there. Close to probably 15 years, maybe not quite that much, after Offred had left. So Gilead has been having some problems, but it's also more established. It's interesting. It's definitely an interesting read and well worth the read. So I highly recommend it. If you've read this, tell me what you thought of it. Did you like it as much as The Handmaid's Tale, or did you feel like I did, that while it was very interesting and fascinating, maybe the character connection just wasn't quite as strong as The Handmaid's Tale? Did you find it at all confusing that everybody had multiple names? By necessity, and again, they did it in first person, so I think that helps. But holy cow, all the names. And it's hard talking to somebody who hasn't read them, because sometimes the names that stick with you most are the names that they've been given in the end. And particularly when it comes to Daisy, that can be rather revealing. That's all I'm going to say about that. So, yeah. Tell me your thoughts on the Testaments if you've read it. Also, my social media is below. Included in that is a link to my books. If you enjoy romance, feel free to check out some of the books I've written. If you enjoyed this content, please give me a thumbs up. Also, please subscribe for more content. Thank you. Bye.